Hello, my name is Gregory Hunter, and this is our proposal project for the Detroit Community Technology Project. The members of my team are myself, Jackeline Martinelli, and Benjamin Ferner. The Detroit Community Technology Project is a project dedicated to increasing technology equity and access to members of under-resourced communities. The goal of our project was to improve the Mesh Network program, which the Detroit Community Technology Project implemented through their Digital Stewards program. The goal of this program is to teach members of the community how to organize and maintain mesh networks, which are ways of connecting people to the internet using local technology. The roles of each of the members were as follows. I was the project manager and researcher. Jacqueline was a researcher and secretary, and Benjamin was a researcher, and he also did our video editing. Through our research, we identified three major problems with the Detroit Community Technology Project and with mesh networks in general. The first problem were slow speeds of mesh networks and or spotty connections. This was due to the lack of dedicated nodes. We identified the problem of the need for technicians, skilled technicians and continuing technicians. And we identified the need for funding for both of these issues. The technicians, and to afford dedicated or higher quality nodes in the network. As stated earlier, Jacqueline and I were in charge of research as well as Benjamin. Jacqueline and I did primary research through interviews and contacting researchers, and Benjamin did secondary research through scholarly articles and publications. I will now pass it on to Jacqueline to expand upon more about the type of research that we did and particularly the research that she did. Now, why did we choose the Detroit Community Technology Project? We are all engineering students, and this is an organization that takes an engineering problem to try and solve a social issue. This is what we believe engineering is all about, making people's lives better through the use of technology. We are especially interested in decentralized technology and community empowerment and development. As to why communities are investing in mesh networks and decentralized internet, an often problem that comes up is the lack of network service or the lack of resources to access these services. In Detroit, 40% of residents do not have access to the internet. This creates a barrier to access of information. By building these mesh networks, residents in these areas can continue to live and gain access to a powerful tool that may not otherwise be accessible. Not only are we allowing people the access to the information that is on the internet, but we're giving them, or the Detroit Community Technology Project is giving them the skills to put these networks in place. These aren't just skills that are used for this one use case, but skills that can be translated into careers and job opportunities. As well, due to the decentralized nature of mesh networks, in case of emergencies, these networks are resilient and allow for continued communication when normal networks may be down. There's also the aspect of free control over the system, that control being given to the hands of the citizens and the users and not to big name companies. As, for example, with net neutrality being an issue in today's world, having access to internet and information that's not controlled or limited by corporations is key in a functioning society. Now, during our process, we were unable to get in contact with members of the Detroit Community Technology Project staff due to constraints on their team and our own as far as time commitments and availability. Due to this, we had to work around how we did our research. Uh, so instead of speaking with the staff members of the Detroit Community Technology Project, we reached out to the neighborhoods and former digital stewards who had participated in some of the programs of the Detroit Community Technology Project. We also reached out to other mesh networks across the nation to expand our research knowledge and to make up for the lack of contact with the organization.
Thank you, Gregory. My name is Jackeline, as Gregory said before, and I will talk about primary research. But first, I would like to give a brief explanation about the difference between primary and secondary research. So primary research is gathering the data on your own because it has never been collected before. So it can be done through interviews, surveys, and even group observation. Secondary research, however, is kind of the opposite because you do the summary or the synthesis of existing research. So we will analyze others people's research. Now that we understand this difference, we will begin to talk about the primary research we did for this proposal. The method we use for this proposal is interviews. We made a selection of people that is directly or indirectly involved in this project. The objective of these interviews is to have a deep understanding about the process of DCTP goes to teach and build wireless mesh network. Also to have a point of view from someone who is inside it, and also identify problems that is perceived by the people who is inside the project. So the results we get from one of the persons that was interviewed, she is a young woman, 25 years old, and she is directly involved in this project. She was first involved on one of the initiatives inside the CTP, and this initiative is called Digital Steward Training, and they basically train people who build their own wireless mesh network based on the idea do it yourself, so they can build and have their own wireless mesh network. And so she's a training, and she was hired by the DCTP. And she told us about the impact of this project on the community because they could provide means for people to have access to internet, and these people who had never have before access to internet before. So in the world that we live now, it's almost impossible to picture someone that doesn't have access to internet, especially in the United States. People cannot be aside of their cell phones for 2 hours, and there is some people that don't have access to it. So this is just to illustrate how important this project and to build this mesh network is to this community. And she also talked about the problems that she perceived because they want to maintaining and scaling up these mesh networks to reach wider areas. And she also gave suggestions that could help on these problems, and it would be donation of materials and donation of money. So the conclusion we have from these interviews is that the work done by the DCTP in an overall is efficient work. It has changed people's lives because now they have access to general information, they have access to better education opportunities, to apply for job positions, to find recipes, and so on. And also they need equipment to improve this so good project to reach more areas and to improve people's life. Now I will pass over to Benjamin, who will talk about secondary research.
Thank you, Jacqueline. My main role in this group was to do the secondary research. The methods I employed was Google search mesh networks. I would look up scientific journals on Wayne State's online library, and I would look at other organizations' websites. Organizations like Bamboo Wi-Fi, MetaMesh, and MileMesh. Now, the objective of my research was I was looking for information on mesh networks and how other organizations had solved the problems that they run across. I also wanted to look at ways to get ahead of any future problems and perhaps find ways to future-proof it through scientific journal reading. I also wanted to find out how feasible it was to actually have the network set up and if it was cost effective. Now, my results were pretty conclusive. I found out that there's a way to increase the quality of the network by using wired connections between nodes. And before that, the nodes would basically be set up in a cluster where hopefully multiple ones overlapped with one another so that if one node went down, another one could pick up the slack and continue the information flow. Now, wired connections is very similar, except in almost like a straight line among the wired meshes, the nodes would be connected, and through this, you'd get a much stronger connection with less feedback. Now, the benefits of the mesh network I found through my research was there are some areas that internet providers don't want to go into either because they don't think it's cost effective or they don't want to set up a business in that area for whether they don't think it's profitable or it's just not in their expansion plan. Now, this is good for areas in Detroit where roughly 40% of people don't have access to internet, and rural areas where there's not a lot of competition, so you might be stuck with paying too much. Now, the important thing about the network is keeping the cost low means that community members need to come together and be proactive with one another and learn how to take on the challenges of operating a mesh network. And the challenges is understanding how the technology works, how to keep it running, how to make sure that everything is working properly, and most importantly, keeping the internet going. Now, they're using a technique known as self-configure, which means as new nodes come up and some come down, they find a pathway to get the information from the request to the requested. So if someone wants to search something on their phone or computer, the request goes through the mesh network to the internet and gets information, and the mesh network guides it back in the most effective and efficient manner. You also have to look at the power restrictions and the location of where you're putting these nodes, because the nodes have to be in an area where they're going to have the maximum range, because if you put it in front of something that's metal, the signal gets refracted, and if you put it in areas where the signal can't travel, like it's inside a building, so it can only travel sometimes a third of the distance it would normally be able to do. And you have to have the right equipment, because you don't want to have outside devices inside when they'd be better suited outside, and vice versa. Now there's ways around that. It's building like a small enclosure for inside devices that you'd be putting outside. But you want to make sure they're in the maximum location where they're going to get the maximum signal. Overall, I'm still convinced that mesh networks are useful for communication and other uses, like if there's a natural disaster or other disruptive signal going on. The equipment, you need at least 2 devices. The more the better. You want them in good locations. And to keep the project going, you need to energize the community, because if you have to pay people to service these nodes or / devices, the costs go up and it becomes less and less feasible to actually do it. So keeping the community involved and feeling like they're making a difference is the best way to keep this going and keep it successful. Thank you, and now Gregory will be talking about the conclusion of the project. Thanks.
Now, for our identified problems for the Detroit Community Technology Project, we found that one was the speed of the network. As the network would grow, as stated by Benjamin, the way the mesh networks work is that they find people on the network, devices on the network, and create pathways. And the more people are on the network, the more pathways, and the network determines the fastest pathway to take from the end user to the connection to the main connection source, and creates a pathway. Now, when you add too many connection pathways, it takes longer times for the network to figure out the fastest pathway than it does to actually deliver data. Another issue is that without the vice versa, if there are too little pathways, it's harder for the network to find pathways to reach the end user. So we believe that one solution to this problem is, or one of the reasons for this problem is there is a lack of dedicated nodes. Most of the nodes in mesh networks tend to be people's cell phones or pads or personal computers. And these can go off and on, and regularly do go off and on and disconnect from the network, whereas a dedicated node is always sending and receiving information and creating pathways throughout the network. As we learned from MetaMesh, these dedicated nodes can operate on open source software, which makes them cheaper and more readily available, or through proprietary software from companies, which, while costing more, tends to be a better and faster product. The beauty of mesh networks is that these two products can be configured to work together. MetaMesh also pointed out that when using proprietary software and not open source software, that they found that not only were their network connections faster, but they lasted longer, meaning that they had to go out less times and needed less technicians to maintain larger networks. Second problem that we found was a lack of skilled technicians. They only have, now the Detroit Community Technology Project does train people through their digital stewards program. But these people are mostly primarily trained in setting up mesh networks. And as problems arise later on, they'll need more skills to be able to troubleshoot and solve problems as the network goes up and down. Uh, Another final problem is funding for all of this. Uh, Dedicated nodes and routers cost money, sometimes upwards of $600, and technicians, especially skilled ones, cost money. If they come from outside, it could be some thousands of dollars for very simple problems. And if they come from inside, these community members may not always have the time or readily accessible if they have the skills to troubleshoot and problem solve. Now, our solutions to these issues are, as stated earlier, using cheap dedicated routers. MetaMesh in particular has worked with some companies to create a proprietary software router that sells for retail at about 100. And we believe that due to similar goals, the Detroit Community Technology Project and MetaMesh and probably work out a bulk deal in deployment and support for their routers. We also believe the low speeds can be solved through the use of local internet service providers as bandwidth sources. In particular, we believe that Rocket Fiber from Detroit would be a great partner for this, as to put down fiber wire in neighborhoods is very expensive. But if we were able to connect fiber wire to a few single access points in the neighborhood, and then use the mesh network from there, this would, one, increase the speeds of our network, two, uh, give the businesses some good press, and in the scheme of things, the bandwidth would be very insignificant to their overall load. To the problem of lack of skilled technicians, the Detroit Community Technology Project could offer paid classes. Now, their digital stewards program is free for community members, but if they were to offer paid classes to members outside of the community, it would offer up a resource of possible technicians who could practice and hone their skills, as well as you could offer more classes using the funds from those paid classes. And this goes into our next column of funding. Also, we could use community outreach. As of right now, the digital stewards appear to be younger, millennial aged, or younger people in their teens and 20s. We can reach out to those retirees, those older people in the neighborhood uh, who have more time to dedicate to learning the skill, and also who are left out of this conversation. So we feel that by reaching out to those older members of the community, you also increase digital equity within the community. Finally, to solve the issue of funding, uh, the Detroit Community Technology Project can offer paid services like setting up mesh networks for businesses or local community spaces for the government. This way, not only are routers and mesh networks installed in these areas, but the businesses and government get a benefit as well. For businesses, they would be able to increase their foot traffic because people need to come to them to sort of access or get better access to the network. And also, it's a tax write off for the business as a sort of charitable donation. Uh, As well, another thing that they can offer as far as paid services is to allow community members to sell their data or to sell ads within the mesh network. Right now, it's currently a multi-billion-dollar business of selling data and ads, and there are multiple companies who only sell data and ads. By allowing communities to choose to opt in to sell their data and ads, we would not only give them control of something that they usually wouldn't have control over, but also as a way for the community to benefit and to fund the Detroit Community Technology Project. It is also possible that if there's a surplus of funding, or depending on how residents want to enact this program, this money could actually be used to go either into the residents' pockets or into other community projects. Now, for the feasibility of our proposed options, uh, first starting off with cheap dedicated routers. We were already able to find cheap routers at $100 a router from another mesh network community, MetaMesh. Uh, and given the amount of routers that may be needed for the Detroit Community Technology Project, with them working in 3 different neighborhoods and possibly expanding in the future, I believe there can be a wholesale deal worked out to get them at an even cheaper price. Now, as far as the funding for that, we believe that our funding solutions can well above pay for and even come out on a profitable side for these routers. For the possibility of partnership, we believe that uh, Rocket Fiber is a community based organization. They are already providing free internet service to low income communities, and to provide broadband space is an even less strenuous task than providing full internet service to low income communities. It also makes their job easier. Instead of having to run multiple lines throughout a community, only having to run a few lines. As well, the amount of broadband needed for a mesh network is significantly less, so much so that they wouldn't even notice the load on their network. As far as paid classes, this would be an option for members outside of the community, and therefore would require no extra work from the Detroit Community Technology Project members, and might even act as a revenue source for some of the technicians already in the neighborhood. So this would help them sharpen their own skills and keep them engaged with the project. For community outreach, there are already members of the community who are interested in learning more about technology, retirees, uh, and such. And this is really just an ask to increase technicians. Also does not require any extra work on the part of the Detroit Community Technology Project. On the end of paid services, we did some research on data selling. Uh, as of today, 2018, data can be sold at a price of from $8 a month to $250 per month. Now, with the ability to negotiate as a group and having larger data sets, we could negotiate. It is possible to negotiate for this price on the higher end. And given that this is per individual, even in a mid range, we would be able to generate thousands of dollars just through data selling. Another thing is how do we sell our routers to businesses in local areas, local community centers, and the like. As of today, the average newspaper ad costs about $43.50. This newspaper ad guarantees no return on investment, no additional walk-in business. It's just a possibility that people, the subscribers, will see the ad. Uh, Now, by investing in putting a router as part of a mesh node network, uh, the Detroit Community Technology Project can guarantee that at least foot traffic will increase in the area as people will be trying to find the strongest signal, which these dedicated routers provide, as well with the use of ads or a map to let people know where these dedicated routers exist. We can guarantee that the business itself will be given advertisements to people who will more than likely frequent this area to access the internet. Another thing is that because the Detroit Community Technology Project is a community organization, this can be used as a tax write-off for the businesses. So not only are they increasing their marketing presence, but they're also saving money or at least minimizing their tax burden. Using these options, it is possible to increase funds without the use of grants or donations and to expand the network of nodes and technicians simultaneously. Any profits can go towards installing more nodes in unserved areas and reimbursing technicians, therefore creating a cycle of paid technicians, highly skilled technicians, and more people wanting to be technicians.